morning, my beautiful babes and babettes. I'm your resident active advocate, and I'm here to talk to you today about verbal etiquette, the etiquette of communication. As I have emphasized repeatedly in this series, communication is a very important thing in fostering understanding not only between two people, but between different communities, between different cultures, between different peoples. It's what makes the human species work. Without communication, we'd have all died out a really, really, really long time ago, before anyone in the current generation had even been thought of. So, when it comes to communication between the disabled and the non-disabled communities, and there are all sorts of different types of, quote, disabled communities, just as there are all sorts of different types of, quote, non-disabled communities, because really, we're all part of the same community, but people like to break things down, race, creed, language, culture, la-di-da, even though genetically humans are all very similar to one another. So, in terms of communication between the disabled and non-disabled communities, as I emphasized yesterday, there are going to be different needs between different people, but communication is key always. So, there are a few facets to this. The first of which is don't talk down to a person with a disability. There have been a few times, this was much more common when I was a child, of course, but there had been a few times when people would speak to me like this and, heavily enunciate and often raise their voice because people don't understand that there is a variance in needs between different people with different disabilities. We're not all deaf. We're not all hard of hearing. We're not all incapable of understanding what is being said to us. And that understanding can only come from understanding the person first. Not only should communication depend on the person's needs, but it should also depend on the person's identity and on how they ask you to communicate with them. If a person is deaf or hard of hearing, yes, I would imagine that they would either want you to transcribe or to raise your voice. All right, so that is an obvious case in which that kind of thing would be necessary. If you know that a person, however, has an intellectual disability, it is also not necessarily going to be beneficial to do that. Okay? Different communication methods for different people, but you communicate with them on their level and on their terms. Because if you're the one coming to us, it's a matter of you understanding what we need before you prejudge us and say, this is what I know they need or what I think they need. All that sort of thing is subjective based on the individual's preference and also based on, as I say, the individual's needs. So, this also refers to the use of person-first language. You will maybe have noticed that most times in this series, when I have spoken about people with disabilities as an overall group, I use the word person first. A person with a disability, people with disabilities. This is lashing back against the idea of the master status, that this one trait is what I will define you as. The disabled person in my life. The blind chick, the deaf chick, that kind of thing. Person-first language, however, is emphasizing the fact that this person is a human being before they are a person with a disability. They're the person with the disability. And I mean, I know that all of this so-called PC language will also boil down to personal preference. There are certain things I really don't mind being called. There are certain things that I really hate being called. That is also dependent on personal preference. Very much of what boils down to being disability theory also boils down to the individualistic level. We are not, all of us, members of one giant collective called the disability community. I might refer to the disability community, but there is a great deal of nuance in that term. There are disability communities, and people who identify as, say, deaf, capital D, is the same as people identifying themselves as being an English speaker, a French speaker, an Arabic speaker, a Mandarin speaker. Sign, ASL, is its own language. Therefore, a community can form around that language, which creates that identity, and that identity, which created that language. There's a symbiosis of relationship here. ASL, people in the psychology field have noticed that it belongs to the same parts of the brain as a spoken language. There's the Broca region and the Wernicke region. I can't remember which is which, but the one is for speech comprehension, the other is for speech production. Look into this yourself because it's actually very interesting. Humans are primed for language, whether it is spoken or not. We have distinct parts in our brain that recognize language, spoken or not, and we have distinct parts in our brain that produce language, spoken or not. Braille, I may point out, is not itself an independent language. It is a writing system. Braille, the different symbols will mean different things depending on the context and depending on the language you're writing in. So I've never actually seen pictographic Braille, like Braille that would be used in, say, a language like Mandarin that uses characters for words or for parts of words, like for the different phonemes, like, say, the CH sound or the TH sound, that might be one figure, whereas in English that's two different letters. Right, so English Braille is going to differ from French Braille. Depending on the context, there will be different symbols used in different ways. That is not what we are talking about here. We are talking about the importance of language itself as a faculty of which all people are capable. In order to effectively communicate and in order to be effectively understood, and in order to foster understanding between the two sides of this equation, we have to understand the importance of proper communication between one another and on one another's terms. As I say, if you are the person who is coming to the one with the disability with the intention of helping them, or hell, even befriending them, because we have friends too, thank you, and it's not just other people with disabilities whom we can be friends with, I think it's very important to communicate and to know that communication is itself important. You know, the importance of communication is the reason why we're alive and the reason why we have survived this long and continue to get along as a species. So that is my video on the politics and etiquette of language. Oh, how very highfalutin. And I will see you tomorrow to talk more about this topic, but I will figure out the actual topic for tomorrow by tomorrow. Thank you for your lovely attention and participation, and I'll see y'all tomorrow. Bye! Mwah!